Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with three brutalists. First, his name's not Miller, and he has no sons. It's P.T. McNiff. How's it going, P.T.?
What's this? What is all this? Who has authorized you to come into my home and tear everything apart? I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Now I'm a little concerned if that's the persona you're taking on for this episode.
Well, we'll see where it leads me.
Okay, all right. And he's willing to cut into his own salary to get this podcast right. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I've found our conversation persuasive and intellectually stimulating. I'm good, Jen. Good to be here. Good to be back. Boy, were there some lines that I could continue antagonizing you with, but I decided I was going to play it nice tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And last but not least, he is, above all, a principled artist. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you doing, Antonio?
Excuse me. Whatever this is supposed to be, I don't like it. I'm calling your husband to come and fetch you. That's the line. That's what Greg...
Yeah. That's great. Oh, I love it. Antonio's always willing to go there. Those were all references to the film we are here to review today, The Brutalist, which is out in theaters now. Brady Corbet's 3.5, you heard me right, 3.5 hour period drama, and that's with a 15-minute intermission, tells the story of a fictional architect, László Tóth, who survives the Holocaust and immigrates to Philadelphia. Oh, there's so much more. But if you're listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. And then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. And I just want to add that I appreciate that, lots of you probably haven't seen this movie. So we want to be extra careful in the spoiler-free section just because it's hard to carve out 4 hours in your day to watch The Brutalist as much as you want to. PT, if listeners want to hire us for a project after listening to this episode, what can we do?
No matter what the others try and sell you, it is the destination, not the journey. And your destination can be to follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcast. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. And also on Letterboxd, the account is at LTRpod, or you can search for the hashtag LTRpod to see what each of us individually has been watching. Jen?
Thanks, PT. We are almost ready to get into our discussion of The Brutalist, but first we want to do, I know we haven't done these in a long time, so this is very exciting. We want to do a quick movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
Oh, I've missed that. So we're doing a movie news update today, not because we want to share actual news, but it's because the news hasn't happened yet. But we are recording this on Monday. The Oscar nominations are coming out on Thursday, January 23rd. And we are planning to have a reactions episode after that, but this is kind of our last chance to get in any sort of predictions or kind of like talk before we know, right? This is the before. So Greg had the great idea of having us share one wish or one sort of hope diction. What's something we want to see come Thursday? Antonio, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll start. For me, it's Marianne Jean-Baptiste for Hard Truths and Best Actress. She has won a number of critics awards. She won the 3 biggest critics awards, the New York Film Critics, the LA Film Critics, and the National Society of Film Critics. That's normally a pretty good indication that she's on her way to an Oscar nomination. But this year, because I think because of the late release of Hard Truths, a lot of people I don't think have seen the film, and I think that's the main thing, is just people need to see it. My hope is that between those critics awards and the BAFTA nomination, that enough people will see it and will support it. It's just a splendid performance, and to me the performance of the year in any category. And I'd love to see her. It would make me so happy to see her nominated on Thursday. How about you all?
The hope that we can have, even if people haven't had a chance to see Hard Truths, or that's sort of an issue, which I agree. I think the rollout hasn't been great, and people kind of knew that from the beginning. They were like, Bleecker Street doesn't have a great reputation of running pretty good campaigns. But the thing that I think it's Little Gold Men reminded me of is that Marianne Jean-Baptiste has been working in Hollywood for a very long time. She's been on a lot of TV, and so she's worked with a lot of people in the industry, and that might be enough good. Like she might have enough goodwill there to kind of at least push people to see Hard Truths. You know what I mean? If not, to actually just vote for her.
I was going to say, I think that's great. I think that's a really good point, Jen. I agree. And co-signed everything Antonio said about the performance. I will say a potential opposite issue, which will also become relevant when we get to the Oscar chances of our main movie today, is we're getting to the point where it'll be people who are checking in on these movies who don't necessarily imbibe all of the things that are out there the way that say we do. And it's the voters who are just like, I'm working, I got stuff to do, I gotta log into the portal a couple days before the votes are due, and try to check some boxes. And it's possible you could watch Hard Truths for like 15 minutes and be like, I don't like this and I don't like this person, and kind of just check out, because you would miss sort of the increasing depth of the performance as it unfolds. So I hope that's not the case. I also hope that she gets nominated. I will say I'm wrestling between two for my choice, but I'll just go with more of my heart. And I will say I would like international feature film to nominate Kneecap, which I just think is a great time. We did not talk about it that much. I nominated it for a few things at the Letters, an episode people should go back and check out, but I wasn't, didn't think it was going to push into winning anywhere. So I didn't really talk about it any further, but it's just really fun. And it embraces the questions of language and using different languages. I think, the idea of, it's funded in England, but it's set in Ireland. Like that doesn't really feel like an international movie. But sort of the questions of colonialism, even within that small part of the world, and what it means to have different languages spoken there, and how things, what power comes from retaining your own language and pushing back against the colonial control of it. Plus a lot of drugs, a lot of rapping. What a fun time. So, there's lots of great movies that I'm sure that would deserve a nomination there, but I am hoping that it gets in there. I think that would be really fun.
Greg, how about you?
I just wanted to shout out that I have seen Hard Truths now, and I now can actually co-sign that and do agree that it's a great performance. Her reel should absolutely be the furniture store scene, which to me is just so wonderfully terrible in all its regards. PT, apologies for my ignorance. Does Kneecap have an original song? Because that's what I would wish for it, is that we get to see them perform at the ceremony.
I mean, that would be lovely. It does have an original song that doesn't, it's Sick in the Head. Which is the one they write in the school when they break into the school and use the old 808. So that would be lovely. I guess I took the assignment as what was more like not guaranteed, but still kind of likely. So I went with the film, but it would be awesome if they got both. But if they got song and they had to come and perform, I don't know if people are going to be ready for that. There's going to be a lot of confused faces in the audience.
Yeah. I mean, it always goes back to It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp, right? When like everybody's like, what is happening at the ceremony? But I actually, if I were the marketing team, I would hope for that, because I think that's the best like go see this movie now moment you could ask for. But I'm not undermining your pick. I had a couple I was really stuck on, and I took the assignment as like who's right on the bubble, and so I didn't pick, but I want to give a passing shout out because I'm cheating at the game I made up 5 minutes ago. To Monica Barbaro, who I think is in on most people's accounting for best supporting actress. She's on the edge in a lot of it. Jamie Lee bubbling up. I did finally get out and see The Last Showgirl today, and I will say I do not understand that as a like, no, Jamie Lee desperately needs a second Oscar for this. I mean, honestly, she's got a couple good moments, but it's not all that different from Isabella Rossellini. Like, she's not like a co-lead by any stretch. No shame on Jamie Lee Curtis, who I fully backed for that old one. So I'm a little worried about Monica Barbaro. I'm gonna go with a Sebastian Stan for lead actor. I want to see him get in, and I'm going to go so far as to say I want it to be for a different man, because I saw both Sebastian Stan performances the same weekend. His Donald Trump from the early 80s is really incredible in a movie that like it's hard to just care about even in our new America. So I feel like if he gets in, it's going to be for The Apprentice. But I think I'm a little warmer on A Different Man than PT and Antonio were. But I will say that is a really difficult movie because it's taking these swings at like parody and surrealism and then actual drama and pathos. And I think there are some just absolutely brilliant moments where Sebastian Stan is just standing in a doorway staring at people, and you see everything in his face and see him kind of going through all of it. So I really loved that performance. I think even if Sebastian Stan does not get through for either, he's had the right narrative this award season, which is that he was overlooked and then he was like given his due. And even if it means no actual Academy Awards, people are at least paying attention enough to say, let's send him our cool script. Let's send him something that's not Bucky Barnes 2.0 and give him something good. So probably getting in, maybe getting in. I don't know. Jen's the one listening to all the shows, but I that's my pick is I would rather see that in for fifth spot in lead actor.
I mean, he definitely is in the mix. I think at this point, which I couldn't even say maybe like even like a few weeks ago, but he's sort of duking it out with Daniel Craig, because Daniel Craig missing at BAFTA is, first of all, strange, but sort of speaks to how maybe people aren't into Luca Guadagnino's queer and therefore isn't going to give him Daniel Craig the juice to make it in. Whereas, you know, as you were, Sebastian Stan is actually the opposite. He's just been rising in momentum, you know, since the Globes. So, and the Globes, because everything else, unfortunately, has sort of come to a halt in terms of campaigning events. Like the Globes are arguably going to matter more on this Oscar voting period than normal, because there hasn't been a lot else because of the fires. So the other weird thing is I was listening to an extensive conversations happening about makeup and hairstyling nominations. And so the pairing of, so if Different Man can get into makeup and hairstyling, that's a really good sign for Sebastian Stan. Like they will, the impression I'm getting is that it's both or none. Different Man really does seem to be in the mix, because people are like, well, clearly, even if someone hasn't watched the entire movie, all they need to do is see like a still or a clip from it to know that the crazy makeup work on Sebastian Stan is really impressive, right? Even if it doesn't stay that way for the whole movie. So it's kind of between that and Beetlejuice, believe it or not.
Oof. I shared with you all, I was listening to the best needle drops of the year playlist on Spotify today, and MacArthur Park came up, and it was like I'd blocked all of Beetlejuice from my mind. I was like, wait, no. Oh, and then wait, it did. Oh no. So I don't know. I'm over that movie.
Beetlejuice legit can do like a Napoleon style haul and have like 3 or 4 nominations. I kid you not. Like
it is a sequel to a movie that won the Academy Award for Best Makeup.
Yeah. So it's got kind of a narrative, and it's the one that has like the most sprawling amounts of makeup and prosthetics and stuff, right? Like as opposed to just focusing on one character. So, you know, that is. And then there's this other movie that no one seems to know about called Waltzing with Brando, where Billy Zane becomes Marlon Brando, and apparently that could very well be the Golda of this year, where people are like, what?
It's because there's that one still photo that's like the promo shot, and you're like, oh yeah, that looks just like Marlon Brando, but apparently it's Billy Zane, and that may be enough for it to get a nomination because everyone will be like, yeah, it looks like him.
Yeah, so that's what's going to edge out A Different Man. Unfortunately, Beetlejuice, or Waltzing with Brando, a movie no one has seen. So sorry, Greg. All right, my turn. See, this was dangerous to do this segment because you got me going about the horse race, and I can't stop talking about makeup and hairstyling, which is what. Okay, so my Hope Diction is for Ramel Ross in director and Jomo Frey in cinematography. I think they are definitely at this point on the. I know, sorry, it's my show. Get off my back. Come on. Did you learn nothing from the letters? And I think Nickel Boys in general on the outside at this point. It is really underperformed all season. It's probably not getting into Best Picture. It's in the running for those last two spots in the Best Picture 10, but it's Sing Sing is, I think at this point, is more likely to get in the Nickel Boys because it had a strong BAFTA performance. So, I think their work, especially in terms of directing and cinematography, is just exceptional and so groundbreaking. And it would just make me sad. I think, in particular, Jomo Frey for cinematography, because it's like, that is that movie. You know what I mean? Like, that's what that movie's all about, is the crazy cinematography in it. So, but it's likely that Ed Lachman for Maria is going to get in over Jomo Frey. So, a movie that people are pretty mid on. So,
I mean, it looks nice, but I mean, compared to what Nickel Boys does, it's like, who cares? Sorry.
Right.
Ed, I know. Ed Frey.
All right. Well, so yeah, we're excited to see what happens on Thursday. I say get ready for craziness, because I feel like there's going to be it is the kind of year that can have lots of wild surprises. Like, people are talking about Nosferatu getting into Best Picture. People are talking about Greg already talked about Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, there's just so many things where people are like, what? What is going on?
There's always one that we've been talking about for months that as of Thursday we no longer need to talk about. Anybody have a guess? Is that Last Showgirl, and this is just a weird last minute blip?
Yeah, because Last Showgirl is not eligible, did not make the shortlist for Best Song, so it doesn't even have that going for it.
Greg's question strongly implies we've been talking about The Last Showgirl for months, which I don't know.
No, we haven't. It's
true.
Yeah.
Pundits are now acting like we've been talking about it for months.
Yeah, it was bubbling after Cannes, right?
Sure.
With some some Pamela Anderson.
Pamela Anderson. And Pamela Anderson got in at the Globe, so people were talking about it for that.
Yeah. I would guess the answer for that is, I mean, unfortunately, it might be Nickel Boys, which I think would be the number one This Had Oscar Buzz episode in a year when they finally unlock this year, if that were to be the case. Otherwise, maybe like September 5, which has been sort of like creeping in like some of the, production design and costumes, because it's, in the 70s, and then also maybe coming up in Best Picture. And I think people thought it was going to make a run at some other things, but it's just sort of been around, but has never left because it keeps getting some random nominations. But I think it's very possible it might not get nominated for anything.
It's turned the Hollywood Reporter's Scott Feinberg into a pariah, because he's had it on his predictions list forever, and people were like, what is he doing? Some people accused him of trying to like influence the Oscar race by putting this movie that no one else was predicting in his Best Picture predictions, and he's like, no, if you've seen this movie, you should know how like catnippy it is for the Academy. So I haven't seen it yet, obviously, so I can't confirm or deny that, but it's just been hilarious listening to a bunch of podcasts and hearing people talk about him behind his back. It's like it's quite rude, actually. But and some people won't even name him. They're like, well, if you know, but there is a critic who seems really set on having September 5 in this race. Crazy. Okay.
My prediction is Baby Girl. That just feels like one where we'll be like, ha, remember how people thought Baby Girl was going to be an Oscar
People
movie?
were so sure. Yeah.
But then I will say PT took my answer, and I can guarantee it's September 5th because I just booked a ticket for Wednesday night to go see it. So that'll be my last, see if I can get one more in before nominations movie. So that almost guarantees it won't be in.
It got in a PGA, so it has a shot at Best Picture. Weirdly,
which I saw someone explain as like it's a movie about producers producing, so of course the PGA liked it. But okay, at the risk of, I know we've already belabored this a little bit, but I have one question. It's mostly for Jen because she's paying attention to it. Do you have any last, for our listeners, any last call for what might be the surprise nomination that no one thinks is happening? So not, I mean, and I guess you could reverse it and saying a snub, but is there something, you know, we've talked about Jamie Lee, we've talked about how there's 4 or 5 movies fighting for the last spot or two in Best Picture. You know, there's the bubbling under ones in all the acting categories. Yeah. Is there one that you have that you are like, I think this might be one that most people won't see coming, but you can?
I mean, what I'm kind of feeling at this point is Marianne Jean, and this is hope dicting, which I usually don't allow myself to do, but Marianne Jean-Baptiste and Fernando Torres getting in and Cynthia Erivo out. I think that's the thing people I think that's the thing that people have settled on. People have settled on Cynthia Erivo. And I think Wicked so far this season has followed Barbie's path in every way. And remember what happened with Margot Robbie. And people were outraged because they were like, who do you think starred in this movie that everyone loves and is getting nominated everywhere else? So that's one that I would keep my eye on. I think a shakeup in Best Actress is inevitable. Because as Greg sort of alluded to, Nicole Kidman was in the front running at some point this season, right? Like people were like, oh, clearly she's going to get in for Baby Girl. She's out. Angelina Jolie's out. So I think Best Actress is going to be where the craziest upset happens. The other thing too is I think the substance, people are now overestimating the substance, so it's not going to get in somewhere people are expecting. I think Demi Moore is safe, you know, famous last words after the Golden Globes, but I think a lot of people are just assuming Coralie Farjah is getting in at director. I don't think that's a sure thing at all. So I think director is the other place to watch out for, where people are going to be like, really?
She deserves it more as director than as writer, but when somebody has that combo, they often just shirk them over into writing. Yeah.
But so she might be the only woman who could make it in, except for the All We Imagine Is Light director, whose name I'm not remembering. But
Pyle Kapadia. Yeah.
Thank you.
People have backed off on having that be the international upset, but yeah, that definitely could still happen.
Well, I think you successfully avoid any charge of pure hope dicting when you take a Wicked nomination out, especially in.
I know, right?
So that feels like, you know, you get to maintain your
because people are like, oh, Fernando Torres didn't get longlisted at BAFTA, therefore she's not really in it. But like, again, Golden Globes are going to end up mattering more than they normally do. So
I was just thinking about how you are giving nightmares to all the ABC executives who want the Oscars to do good ratings when you're taking away Wicked nominations and giving it to very deserving foreign performances that nobody has access to see in a lot of cases. So tough on you, but hey.
I think, and this is my last one, Borisov's the other one that people are just assuming's in. I don't think he's safe.
Okay. This is probably a better question for later, but over under on how many Wicked songs will be performed at the Oscars, even though none of them are nominated.
They're usually pretty strict about that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Can anyone remember a time that they performed a song that was not actually nominated?
We talk about Bruno.
Oh, right. That wasn't nominated. Yeah, see, that makes
the Disney overlords, though, and Wicked is Universal, so we're probably safe.
But
it'll be the bumper on every commercial break, but I don't think they'll.
You're gonna invite Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande to the awards and not have them sing any songs from Wicked. Okay.
Yeah, that does seem weird.
Okay.
I would be okay with them being in a bit with Conan where they're like all singing.
Opening, yeah, maybe the opening like monologue is them.
Over under on Conan in green face paint is 100%, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
at some point during the night,
Yeah.
that's a given.
Yeah, he can't be wearing a Pope hat because Nikki Glaser already did that. So
Right.
I'm sure his writers were like frantically trying to rewrite whatever his opening is for that reason. Yeah. Anyway, okay. See, good idea, Greg, but bad for time.
Yeah, we're
we've
good.
already spent 25 minutes on this. Okay. So I think we're ready to start talking about the Brutalist. We'll start with our short takes. What did you think?
I was
4 hours later.
I was quite possibly the least excited to watch this, and I think I ended up liking it maybe the most. It's not that I didn't hear all the buzz about its genius, it's that I've heard this buzz before. And the one that I remember is Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life. And I remember leaving that movie thinking like, I don't know. Like, I don't get it. I was like puzzled and sort of cold. But that wasn't the case here. The movie is an experience, and not just because of its runtime or the intermission or just its ambitions are really grand. And for me, it really rose to meet the occasion. I watched it at a 10:15 in the morning showing in Burbank. The theater was full, and
Wow.
everyone was chatting during intermission. I was by myself, so I even talked to like the stranger next to me. I never do that, but I initiated a conversation because I wanted to talk about just the first act of the movie. And then at the end, like, some people were just awestruck, some people were put off, but no one had nothing to say. And to me, that's a sign of a really great movie. What did you all think?
So I'm gonna use the phrase, I think this is a triumph of marketing, and that sounds like I'm using it pejoratively, but I'm actually not. In that what we've heard for the last few years, especially the last year, is that we need to start understanding that going to the movies has to be like going to an amusement park, right? Where it's an investment. People don't want to give the time. People don't want to give the like money to like hire a sitter and all of that. And we've been told that means they're only going to do it for Marvel spectacles or Oppenheimer Barbie events as a part of this. And on paper, the Brutalist is not any of that. And yet, I think they've done an incredible job about making it that kind of big event that Antonio just alluded to. And so I think the movie was very good. I think it is a singular vision and it is executed at the highest level. And for that, that's the kind of thing that's not supposed to happen anymore, where a director gets to actually create their vision. And then on top of that, you turned it into this like wonderful special event still. And I know that's why some people can't see it frustratingly. So as a reminder to listeners, I saw this the night before the election. Boy, those lines about like Pennsylvania, the greatest, the most important state in the nation, got really big reactions in my theater. And I'm sure very big, very different reactions in your theater. But the fact that there was a near sellout crowd on one of the nights, like everybody had something else to be thinking about, and we were all there and we were all excited. And I'm going to be honest, the VistaVision thing to me is the Mad Men It's Toasted. Like, I don't know what VistaVision is, but then when somebody's like, should I go see Brutalist? I'm like, yes, it's in VistaVision. You really gotta like, you gotta find a 70 and you gotta. And so I think all of that made this a really special event. And I use that all complimentary. And I think that this can be a model moving forward to making sure art house movies get good attention and get that kind of theme park quality that Marvel has just by throwing their logo on something. And the quality is there, as Antonio said, like all of that spectacle. But if it had been a really dull time, I wouldn't be happy. And I left buzzing. Exactly the same intermission. Everybody was buzzing. Everybody was racing to the bathroom because it was a small theater bathroom and it did not meet capacity that night. But it was really wonderful. So sorry for the long rant, but that's where I'm at. PT, where are you on the Brutalist?
I mean, I am similar positions as both of you. I thought this was great. We're going to get into, when we do get into the spoiler zones, the parts where on the that first viewing, I was like, I'm interested in these choices, said negatively, but those are very minor in the grand scheme of things. And I think, to keep it as short as possible, what I will say is, for a movie that's 3 hours and like 10 or 15 minutes plus the intermission, I was surprised when I realized it was ending. Like, I was like, oh, like both at the intermission break and also at the conclusion, I was kind of like, oh, we're already, oh, okay, I guess we're done. So I understand that maybe part of the discussion here, part of the listening group here, are people who are like, okay, I've heard this movie is something, like, do I really need to invest this time? I think it moved really fast, and I think it was propulsive and interesting and engaging, and really well done and well executed in lots of different ways. So yeah, I'm very pro this movie, and I'm glad I got to see it in VistaVision on 70 millimeter. I guess you don't see it in VistaVision. It was filmed in VistaVision, but I saw it 70 millimeter and in a sold out theater when people were very excited about it. So Jen, how about you?
PT, you're the one to ask. Vertigo is also VistaVision, isn't that
I believe
correct?
so. I believe that's correct.
I watched a movie within the last month, and I think it was Vertigo, which proudly in VistaVision.
And it's something from like around that time, was sometime in like the early 60s. Vertigo's a 59, I think. And sometime in the early 60s is the last time there was a movie filmed in VistaVision, which is just, one of those widescreen film formats that didn't really catch on as much as it could have. But somehow becomes the cheap way of doing things for filmmakers in 2024.
So VistaVision was created at Paramount in 1954. And I believe I've seen interviews with Brady Corbet, the director of this film, saying that he wanted to make this in VistaVision because he wanted to view it sort of through the lens of this particular time period. Like, he wanted to match the filmmaking style with the time period that the story takes place in. So, for what it's worth. So, I really enjoyed this movie. I think I understand why folks are critical of the part 2 post intermission section. I do think it shifts gears quite a bit in a number of ways, which we'll talk about in spoiler mode, I'm sure. But I think that this is a movie that has a lot of ideas, and I think those ideas are very well matched to all of the stylistic and kind of narrative choices that Corbet and the others who worked on it made. So I while yes, the part 2 is not as fun, rousing, I love cinema kind of experience as part 1 is, because part 1 is definitely that way. It's like, when you get to that intermission, you're just like, it's endorphins everywhere. It's just like, I love the movies. Like, and whereas, like, there's some stuff that happens in the second half that might put a damper on that a little bit. But I think that's entirely by design, and I actually really love this as an intellectual project about the arts and immigration, and it just has so much stewing together, things that don't always have to be tied together. It really is stewing together in this really big story that's has a lot to say. And so, and and add to that, like, the technical side is really great, the performances are great, so it's like the quality of it is really there, plus it's really has something to say, I think, in a way that we don't always see in even movies that are trying to kind of be big and epic like this. Actually, I think we preemptively start a recommendation algorithm because a long movie like this, I feel like we all probably feel like we have to justify the trip to the movies, the runtime, etc., for other folks. So I'll just skip ahead and say, like, what do you feel like, for those who aren't like excited just by virtue of the premise of this movie, in terms of it's shot on VistaVision, it has an intermission, it's 4 hours long, right? Like if those are things that people making people balk, like what are you selling? What is the selling point of this movie beyond that?
I appreciate your adding in like the drive to and from the theater to the length, because it keeps being rounded up from like 3 hours 25 to 4 hours. I would say, and this may be too much of a Venn diagram overlap with people who are already excited. So maybe this isn't going to sell anyone new on it. But this is one of those movies that sort of aims to be like the great American novel, but in a motion picture. And it's trying to sort of make a statement about the country and the concept and the people. That's not just not just like the story of these characters, but the characters as stand-ins for these wider issues in society and trends through history. And I think that's why it got a lot of Godfather comparisons before, because that is also a movie that is very clearly about like, this is about America. It's not just about this mafia family. And I think that maybe a mafia family and crime bosses is a easier sell for that than an architect and the guy who hires the architect. But I think that it does have that. If you're someone who wants more, who feels like, well, I want a movie that's trying to say something instead of just something that has a bunch of pretty images, like this has some really striking, gorgeous imagery. It's filmed really well. It's shot incredibly, but it also has and there's wonderful acting in it, but it all kind of adds up to saying something. And you may agree with it, disagree with it, not like the like some of the things that it says, but agree with some other parts. But that's why to get back to Antonio's point about like people have stuff to say about it, because it is saying something and kind of challenging you to think about the society and America in particular, which is an interesting thing to be doing now.
Yeah. I go to the like to see stage plays normally like once a month. And I think for a lot of like theater goers, not like stage theater goers, the 3.5 hour runtime and an intermission, that's just standard, right? For like a lot of plays and big ideas, right? And that's what you go to the theater to do. And so I think that for people who are already accustomed to that, who like that, I think that this is the closest that I've ever felt to like the theater experience at the movies in a long time. So that's the comp that I would give. I couldn't think of a movie comp, which again I think is to the credit of this film. So that's my comp.
Yeah, I mean, this starts with an overture.
Yeah.
I was like, the second that popped up on the screen, I was like, let's go. Like, I am so ready for this. But not everyone has that reaction to that, probably. And I think what's interesting is that it is also, the thing I would add to that is, because I agree with all that, Antonio, but the thing I would add too is like, it is kind of transporting you back to that sort of like golden age, old timey Hollywood mode, but without the kind of gloss and sheen, you know what I mean? Which I thought was super interesting. Like, it's like, it's using all the touchstones, because I grew up, this is not the first time I said this, but I grew up watching a lot of old movies, like from that time, that were made during the VistaVision time period. And so you get used to, the rolling credits are at the beginning, and there's a long overture of like orchestral music, there's an intermission in the middle, right? Like, and I think those sort of stylistic traditions and could have been a very sort of like nostalgia fueled sort of like, didn't they don't make movies like they used to, but it never felt like that. It felt like something that was fresh and new that I was watching. So
I'll just add in the stupidest comment of all, which is to say grown-ups. Grown-ups should go see this movie. And it's because, so much has been made in the rise of Marvel and Star Wars and all the things we love with the other parts of our brains about the infantilization of particularly the American male. But, we take everybody down with us, because that's what it is to be the American male. And so I have a lot of friends who are like, oh, I don't see those anymore, because they're so juvenile, and I don't, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, great, 3 hours, 45 minutes, complicated movie about an architect that's going to challenge you. And you'll like parts, you'll hate parts, but you'll, have something to go get coffee and talk about after. And they're like, well, so I'm just going to say, one, I'm going to find some new friends. And two, I'm going to just say, like, there have been so many people complaining that they don't make movies like they used to. And as you have all very nicely said, this is a movie like they used to make. And it is kind of the best of that 50s, 60s big epic. The only other experience I've had like this in the theater was seeing Lawrence of Arabia, right? And that, again, is what Jen said, the overture, the intermission, all that. And it's that plus the kind of gritty realism of 70s American cinema, where it's like, no, we're actually going to show not the Technicolor dream of what it is to come alive in America, kids. It's actually going to be really like hard to watch at times, and it's going to be difficult, and you're going to root for the guy and not root for the guy, and root for, his wife and not root for his wife. And all of that is like what grown-ups need. And I think, there is a trend in American culture that needs to remember that they are grown up. And I put myself, listeners can't hear, I'm surrounded by Star Wars toys in my Zoom picture. So it's not like I'm throwing stones from somewhere other than a glass house. But I do think we have to remember that art is not just about nostalgia and making us feel so good because we are the best in the world. It is also about challenging us, and that's what great art can do. And I think this is for grown-ups for that very reason. So be challenged. Put on your big boy pants. Go.
There's a pull quote if I've ever seen one. Okay, so the last things I'll add before we move on is, if you like any story that has to do with sort of the like Ellis Island immigrant story, so I'm thinking like
An American Tale.
5-0 goes west. This is not. I know, right?
The Godfather Part 2.
Right. But I mean, like something like somewhere in between Brooklyn and Gangs of New York, I feel like is this where this movie lives, kind of, But yeah, that kind of coming to America, but not that movie type of narrative. This is a really good version of that. It really digs into kind of the hardships, right, and the sort of like struggles with culture and assimilation, and yeah, the themes of this are really on point in terms of that. So I would say if you're even remotely interested in those kinds of stories, this is a good one for you. And then the other thing I will add is, if you at all are into art, like if you're an artist, you don't have to be an architect to appreciate the art themes of this movie. Like if you've ever struggled with, what does my art mean? Like how do I do the art I want to do, but also not starve to death, right? How does an artist function in a capitalist society? Like this movie is all about that. So I think if you appreciate artistic vision and talent and artistic genius and that kind of, and those are things that you think about, this is a good movie for you to watch. Okay, are we ready for spoiler mode? There's so many potential spoilers in this movie, so I think we should get into it. So if you have not seen The Brutalist and you don't want it spoiled, we're not even going to spoil 5 minutes of the now up to 4 hours. I've like PT said, I've exaggerated.
4 hours and 30 minutes that you'll spend
to get
paying the babysitter.
I should have planned that. Like every time I mention it, I add on 10 minutes. That would
walking
be great.
to the parking meter, putting each quarter in individually takes 5 minutes. Yeah.
For those of you fact checking this to save you the Google search, the runtime is actually 3.5 hours, but there's a 15-minute intermission,
which is included in that time.
Yes. Yeah. So wait, no,
I think it's 3 hours
3:45 if you count the intermission.
It's 3:35, and then it's 3:20 of movie.
Oh.
And then the 15 minutes make it 3:35.
Then I clearly was not the person to inform
Your
me
Honor.
about this. I didn't know. Okay. Let's just go into spoiler mode. I don't know what All right, so it is fairly common when we go into spoiler mode for me to go right for the end because it's the most spoilery. But this one I genuinely do want to talk to all of you about the ending, just to actually for some basic clarification, if that's okay. So, and I don't when I say the ending, I don't mean the epilogue, though we can talk about that also. Yeah, isn't it great? This movie has an epilogue. Anyway, so at the end, there's this huge scene where Ezra Bay accuses Harrison Van Buren of raping László Tóth, right? So that's the biggest spoiler that's out there, right? And there's, in the kerfuffle, he runs off. And so the movie proper ends with a search for him in the sort of the catacombs of the building that they've been building. And they don't show him, but does that mean did he die? Did he kill himself? There is a guard or a police officer or somebody who says, like, I think we found, in a very detective style, like, I think we found something over here, but that's as close as we get to finding out what happened to him. So what do you think? Like, and what do you think about that choice? Because I think that's a very deliberate choice.
PT and I had a conversation about that, like a pre-show conversation. Like, and this was the first question that I had too, that I really wanted to talk about, even though I knew we were going to talk about it on the show. And his answer, and I think is right, which is that it's deliberately vague, and I think that's a good choice, because I think that as they were going through, I was conditioned. I was like, all right, we're about to see a body, and then when they and at a certain point, when they showed like the cross, I was like, are they going to show him? Is he going to be hanging from, like, because that actually seems like not logistically possible, like symbolically, I guess. But like, I actually don't want to see it. And I'm glad that they didn't go that far and they weren't that literal about it. My assumption was, like, in my heart, I was like, he's dead. Right. Um, um, but I kind of like that it's left sort of unclear as to whether it's he is literally dead, he is sort of spiritually dead, he is, but something, he just becomes a recluse, whatever, but something is broken for him and his power is gone. Is what I felt in the movie. And I think that's the right choice. But yeah, what did you all think?
I mean, that was, you've already said kind of what my initial thing was like, well, of course it's vague. But I agree that it was the right thing to do in terms of, once we got to that point, I did not want that search to end with me seeing what happened one way or another. Like, he's dead, he's hung himself, he's slashed his wrist, he's crying in the corner, he's just like destroying the building from the inside because he's mad, whatever. I want to leave that open and unclear. I can't recall now what who wrote the article that I read that was describing in a positive way of, like, all of the questions like this are actually probably pretty simple. Like, they were saying, the narrative here is very clear, the metaphors are very clear, and it's that the power that he wielded as the artless wealthy man who gets to sort of express himself not through actually creating something, but by lording over the person who can. That power dynamic is broken once someone calls him out for having done that. And so it's not even that, like, he goes to make a choice, it's that existence no longer exists, I guess, or that sort of the role that he played and the way that he lived in the world, poof, disappeared. So he's just like gone in a puff of smoke. What I was curious about, what I was wondering at the time, was, if this is where, until I realized this is wrapping up we were going to time jump and go to the epilogue afterwards, is how much of it was going to be him having to confront, not that he did what he did in raping László because of it was a power move, but because he was a homosexual and that wasn't allowed. And so it wasn't like it's a problem that you raped someone, it's a problem that you raped a man. And that's what he was running away from, more so. Like, if it had been like an accusation that he raped a woman, he wouldn't have left the dining room, he would have stayed there. I that didn't seem to actually because then the story ended at that point. I don't think that matters, but that is where I went in the moment. But I don't, I think it is more just the, him functioning as a symbol of just, wealth and capital that's controlling things, that power is, minimized or, just disappears once you call it out, which I don't know if that tracks in terms of reality, but I think that's, that's the reason why he's gone. And I think we're not supposed to know what actually happened, because what matters is there's just a hole now where he was.
Yeah. I have a small tweak to that. So I think his power has dissipated, but it's actually because his son pushed over Ezra and that crossed the line. I think his response to Ezra's accusation is actually pretty managed and carefully worded in a way that had his son not, had his son stayed cool about it, I think he could have gotten away with it. You know what I mean? I think it's more because the people in that room saw a woman who moments earlier was in a wheelchair, right? And it upgraded to a walker very quickly for the scene. Lying on the ground, right? Helpless, and like violence had been perpetrated on her in front of them. And I think it's because of that he then goes into panic mode. I think had that not happened, he would have his power dynamic, like PT said, like the way that he is used to living and operating would have been maintained. I don't know. What do you think, Greg?
I mean, I just want to hammer home the point. The ambiguity is the point in my mind that this is what happens when great men eventually fall. We don't actually get to know what happens to them. Where's Matt Lauer? Where is he right now? Go ahead. Find him. Like, where in the world is Matt Lauer? It was a whole game, and now, right? But the more serious point I want to make is, like, to me, this relationship that sets up the core of this is one we have seen challenged in our cities and in our museums and in our campus spaces, right? And most notably the Sackler family, right? Whereas once it comes out that the Sacklers are responsible for, the pushing of the drugs that essentially hollowed out this country, they don't go to jail. They don't get crucified, literally or figuratively, as Antonio hypothesized might happen here. Their name just gets scratched off the building, and they're just out there. And I feel like leaving it ambiguous kind of shows that relationship. And here in Boston, we have another family name. You're walking past Fenway Park, and you're like, oh, this is suddenly called David Ortiz Way. I wonder why that's no longer called Yawkey Way. I wonder, hey, look, that used to be Yawkey too. I wonder what happened. And you just don't really hear the backstory and fill in all the details. Yes, those are known details. I'm not like saying it's a complete mystery, but it's that, when the time comes and society flips, that just means that they don't get the fame and the fortune. They just kind of get to go off into the sunset. So I like it in that regard. I don't actually have a thought, Jen. I don't want to dismiss your point. I just don't have a thought on which part of that is what really drives him off. You would be asking too much of my poor memory to remember the exact
That's
sequence
fair.
of that scene. But I certainly think that it is more about kind of social power in that moment than anything. And I think both reads that you offered would suggest that could be the case.
A fun note to add to what you were saying is that I'm looking at the speech from the epilogue, which is the niece Zofia giving the keynote about her uncle at the art retrospective, and it is still called the Van Buren Institute outside of Philadelphia, but it isn't the full name of the mother, which he was like, I want this to be I forget what her name, Gertrude or something, like Gertrude Van Buren,
Margaret.
Maybe. But like, he wanted the full name, and you could easily have seen that it could have become his full name as time went on. So it's still the family name, but it's not exactly the way that like he had planned for it. So that evolution and maybe some of that erasing has already started.
I also really like how the screenplay in kind of setting up this ending withholds any narrative power from Harrison as a character too, right? And I had the same thought that all of you did, where as the camera's moving, like the dolly is moving down the corridor, I'm just like, oh, here it comes. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't like a 90s movie where we're going to see a body like face down in the water. But that's what I thought was coming. That to be specific about what my twisted brain was like trying to imagine before the movie ended. But I like that it doesn't. I think it's so smart that we have his ending be a lack, and then László's ending in the epilogue is one of lasting, timeless power, right? Because his art, his architecture lives on and is like nothing can happen that will take those projects away from him, right? And which is again what he says at the beginning of the movie sets it up perfectly, where he's like, these buildings will withstand all this is my favorite phrase from the whole movie, cycles of peoplehood. I texted this in all caps to all of you in case you didn't remember that. So yeah, I just thought the ending was perfect and very thoughtful. But part I wanted to ask about what you thought happened at the end, because part of me was like, but wait, but what? Because I always want to know. There was a theory floating around, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. That his sons, whose name I can't remember now, is it Henry
von Buren? I think was
Joe Alwyn, who apparently only plays terrible people now.
Harry Lee.
Okay. Oh, so it's Harrison and Harry. That's why I was like, I'm like, is he a junior? I don't remember now. That he has such a strong reaction and kind of like flips the table. And by the table, I guess I mean Adrien Brody. Because he was abused by Harrison as a child. Just putting that out there. There's not a lot in the movie. Like, there's not a lot of text to kind of direct us there, but that would be a reason he kind of like has a freak out, because it's hitting. The accusation is hitting too close to home. Yeah.
Since we're talking about the accusation, I think that we should maybe talk about, people have talked about how Act 1 is like basically flawless. Act 2 is more polarizing. And I think that, at least in my sort of initial conversations, and including with PT, that a lot of it comes down to some of these big decisions in terms of plot, specifically the rape itself. I mean, that's obviously a huge choice and a very startling moment, that it feeds into the themes and things about power. The question is it too on the nose? Is it too vulgar sort of representation? To be honest, for me, like, as shocking as that moment was, I didn't actually find that as startling as Ezra Bay screaming in the dinner scene. Um, that moment to me, like, was on the edge of, that might, like, this feels like maybe a little bit too much even for the climax of the film, even though it gets us to this really interesting place, where this very interesting ambiguous sort of like moment afterwards. So I understand why people, and this was a lot of the conversation that happened after the movie, and I think it's built in here to talk about. I love it as like a, like, if there was ever a movie that earned its like big swings, like, this is it. And so, like, fine, like, let's talk about this. And like, I don't think it's I don't think it's gratuitous in any way. I think it uses every like shock that's built into the screenplay. But I'm very curious as to your thoughts.
Well, I had tried to mention it as vaguely as possible pre spoiler warning, that there were things that I sort of pushed back on in my mind during my initial viewing and right afterwards, that over time I've felt like, and it's a mark of the movie that I keep thinking about it. I'm a little bit less negative on that. It did feel to me in the moment, I was like, oh, this is really on the nose. Like, I get it. I get that this is unfolding. The rich is taking advantage and assaulting and raping and plundering from the artist. Cool. Like I understand that it was too literal to do it, but it also felt a little bit like maybe maybe having Ezra Bay. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I mean, you could judge it. You could judge it a little bit more, but
okay.
We'll let AI judge it later.
AI that later.
But we don't have an AI program to get the Hungarian accent
respeech
correct,
for me.
so.
Okay. Well, anyway, her going. I was like, is this even in character for her? Like, but the more I think about it, it is sort of like it's the culmination of everything. It's pushing to the breaking point. It also dovetails, I think, necessarily with the sort of self-medication element of his heroin addiction, which was the other part of the story where I was like, okay, like, yeah, the artist has to, in the 50s, he's on the junk. I'm like, sure. All right. That felt a little cliched to me, but that it feels nitpicking. Like these are central things. And I understand maybe there are people who that all of that is adds up to being a little bit too much, but I think it all works so well. And there's nothing, not that I've been trying to fix the movie in my mind, but there's nothing that I've thought of or read that would be like, oh, that would have been a better way to take these pieces and move them to endpoint. Like it all does make sense that it kind of becomes almost operatic in it's how much this guy needs to take by Van Buren, how much he has to take by actually like physically dominating this artist, and also how close, sort of on the precipice, both of the Toths become because of this drug usage, and that pushes to like once they sort of achieve that together, it's just like, you know what, like we got to get out of here and we have to readjust. This country is doing all of this to us and we need to leave. And so I think that it makes sense. I do understand because I experience it. People who are just sort of like, I don't like that. But I do think the more I've thought about it, I'm more positive towards it. And I'm very curious how it will feel knowing that's what's coming, watching the whole movie leading up to it.
I have heard a lot of critics say that it clicks a lot more on a second watch because you kind of see what it's for, like why it's doing that.
That was Hasib. Hasib said that, not a critic.
Okay, yeah.
Well, not a professional critic, but
he's professional.
A critic we love. Yeah,
he's a pro to us. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think so. To me, I was not prepared for everything PT just listed. Like, I would also add to that the sort of like heroin induced like orgy that they have that before she overdoses.
No, that was Megalopolis, Jen. Wrong architect movie.
Sorry,
you get confused. Sorry.
But all of those things kind of like, I wasn't expecting the movie to be quote unquote that type of movie that went there. And I also did see like, oh, I would have already picked up on the patron sort of has the power over and abuses and exploits the artist, and I didn't necessarily need a literal representation of that power dynamic between the two of them. However, I do feel like the effect that has in terms of the themes is actually pretty powerful, because what it does is that it forces you to confront and be uncomfortable with those themes actively. You know what I mean? Like, because like in my brain, my rational brain, without those things in the movie, would have been like, yes, like as the patron, he has economic and social capital and power over the artist, and the artist has to kind of bend to his will to be able to, like I could have explained all of those things on paper, but when that scene happens where you realize what's going on, and in particular, the screenplay really comes through because, like, Van Buren's lines during that rape scene are crazy, right? Where he's basically like fetishizing the power dynamic between the two of them, and kind of like calling him kind of a lazy immigrant. You know what I mean? He's like, look, you had so much potential, and he's saying all these things as it's unfolding, right? It's crazy. So I think because it is kind of going to that extreme, it's making the themes sort of more visceral to us as the viewers, right? Because it's like, oh, like I didn't want to watch that, right? and it kind of shortens that critical distance, I think, that you can have otherwise. So yeah, and to me, the two halves of the movie are all about the contrast between them, right? It's about the sort of like hopefulness of the American dream, and like, wow, he was so down on his luck, but look, like fate came in and brought these two people together, and he's going to be okay now, right? And I think the second half very purposely is like spends the entire rest of the movie undermining that feeling and that idea. The enigma of arrival, where he's like, what's going on? I'm just an immigrant off the boat, right? And he's like, oh great, now I can be an architect again. And then the second half is like, hold on. Like it's not quite that easy. And I think it's purposely called the hardcore of beauty, right? Like, because it's like this really hard to deal with and harsh reality that sets in, right? So I don't know.
I don't really have a lot more to add to the question, but to note that I think the way you just expressed that, Jen, was really helpful for me to think about how we were watching the rape the whole runtime of the movie. It was just the kind of ways in which our society allows that kind of intellectual rape to happen, that artistic rape, and to steal all that he had. And so then when it becomes that literal sexual rape and it's so far over the line and so far to watch, that's when we're finally like, oh no, now it's not okay. But I do think it is meant to be that whole dynamic. So since I don't have anything else to add, because you all covered that so well, I will say the other criticism I have of the second half, and one way I've characterized this film, and I want to say this is a little stingy, but I think the first like 15 minutes are incredible, and then you hit the brothel and you're like, oh, like this is this kind of movie, and you're like, I don't know about this. But like the boat arriving in the harbor and the score and like the way the title card and like all of that is just like, yes, the movies, I'm here, past the popcorn, everything's wonderful. But the second half, is where Felicity Jones arrives as Ursula. And I think the critiques I've heard that I'm still struggling with are like, is this just the poor wife stuck at home while the tortured artist does his work? Or is there something more here that changes that character into something better than this? And, famously, Christopher Nolan can't figure out how to write a woman, like, period, but often has this figure. I think of I know we might someday still get to talk about Complete Unknown, but in Walk Hard, the parody music biopic, the wife at home essentially just has like more babies hanging off of her every time they cut to her. And it is that kind of figure, right? Where it's like, oh, all we give the woman to do is to sit at home and cry and deal with this. The actress from The Queen playing Mrs. Armstrong in First Man is the same. You're like these are talented. Claire Foy. It's like, we got to give these actresses something to do other than sit at home and cry because they don't have enough going on. And so I think there's obviously the one scene that we've been talking about, which is an incredible scene Felicity Jones delivers. I thought Felicity Jones was great across this, but I have Star Wars love for her that gives her, that high stock no matter what. So I just want to say, do you think that this falls into those cliches, or does this do something playful or important with those cliches?
I think it does a little bit
Sorry,
more.
Jen, let the men talk. Every time. That's a good joke. Sorry, go ahead.
I actually was gonna wait, and I was like, maybe I should weigh in first. I was gonna be polite and let someone else go first, but I think it is a little bit more, because I'm thinking back to the scene where Van Buren takes them into the city, like gives them a ride in the car, right? And the conversation they have, he is making the assumption that she is just like the little wife, right? And then she very much is like, excuse me, I went to Oxford to study English literature, and I'm going to correct the joke that you tried to bait me into to test, because everything with Van Buren is a test, right? That story he tells at the beginning is the key to the kind of legend to which we can read his character throughout the whole movie, where he's like is it his grandparents that he asks them, what are you going to do with this money I'm going to give you? And then he doesn't sign the check. And then when they give a terrible answer, he's like, haha, I'm not going to sign this check. and I'm gonna talk you down to $500 instead of like 10,000 or whatever it was, right? So that's the kind of person he is, and so he's clearly baiting her in that conversation because he makes some kind of literary, I can't remember exactly what it is now. He makes a literary reference, and then when it's clear that she gets it, he's like, aha, it was taken as it was intended. Great. Like we can be buddies now. And then she goes one step further and is like, and you kind of got it wrong. Um, let me explain to you what the actual text is. And I feel like both, so that to me puts her intellectually at the level of László, because I think the same thing happens in their first exchange where he tells this whole story about his grandparents and how he's being very direct, right? About this is the kind of person I am. Like, if you don't do what I like, you're not getting money from me, right? And László is the next question he asks right after that is like, so why architecture? And László is like, is this a test? And he's like, no. And László's like, yeah, right, buddy. Okay. And gives like the most amazing answer about why architecture is important, right? So I feel like both of them have this thing that kind of fuels his like self-loathing and therefore desire to dominate them even more. You know what I mean? Like, because they're so intellectually sophisticated, and the only thing he realizes he has over them is his economic power and social capital, because he's like he's what people in Doylestown, Pennsylvania would consider American, and they are not.
I want to add one more thing though about Felicity Jones' character. I think that all of that is right about that she proves herself to be, intellectually on par with any other character but another thing that's sort of fascinating is she's not presented as a saint either, right? That there are definite flaws to that character. And let's remember that one of the first scenes that we have of her is her giving her husband a hand job while saying basically that she as I recall that that she had dreams and understood that he was like cheating on her and it's okay, but she just really desired him. Because that's, as an introduction to a character, that's not moving away from the cliche. That's like moving it in like the most grotesque direction that it could possibly go. Right. And so it's, at first I was like, uh-oh, what's happening here? But the fact that the woman that I could resolve in my head, the woman who could have that introduction, right? And then be all of these other things that she is in the course of this movie, that she can only exist in half of the movie and still have a satisfying arc, I think is a credit both to the screenplay and to the actress. But I take Greg's point. Like I understand why people might find that like a problematic character, but ultimately I think I came around to her. PT, I cut you off. What were you about to say?
No, well, I was going to say, to add to Jen's point about sort of how Harrison tried to sort of find other ways besides just sort of direct dominance financially and culturally to sort of play his little games, and along with that car ride and trying to sort of say, like, belittle her almost, or try to lord over her a little bit intellectually. There also was the like, oh, I can get you a job in New York. I go to New York, you can come with me to New York, which by that point was already clearly felt sinister. And so it seemed like it was, oh, he's going to try to worm his way in between the two of them, even if all it would do is make László have to wonder, like, well, what's happening on those car/train rides up to New York. So yeah, I think there is that sort of constant, like, basically, like, the dude's rich and has nothing else to do except to try to like exert dominance and play power games with people, and everyone else is just trying to get by, and he's like, nope, he has the means to just go ahead and do that, which is more about him than about her. So I agree with what you're saying, Antonio, and I think that's, I'm with the group that it is more than just, here's the sad wife character. That said, there isn't a lot of oxygen for her. Like, she gets to do these things in these little moments. There's not a lot of time spent with her, which, you know, again, it's a 3.5 hour movie. You don't. There's not a lot of more time that we could have added in to have focus just on her or have more scenes with her. So I understand that she sometimes, you know, if you step back and look at the whole picture, functions as just a sort of satellite of László. If it's László versus Harrison is the movie, then she's just sort of circling around and occasionally bouncing off of Harrison. But I do think she has a lot of nuances and quirks, and there's interesting stuff there. And they also don't. It never felt cheap where it was like, actually, she knows a lot of English. Actually, she's super smart. Actually, she's a writer and she could do, you know, X, Y, and Z, but now she's stuck doing, you know, women's home journal type you know, just society reporting or fashion stuff and home design stuff, which she doesn't care about. You know, that never felt like she was sort of overpraised or elevated to be this sort of like weird ideal of like, of course she's great at everything, and you know, with all the flaws that her husband has, she's perfect. Like, she does have flaws and she has these emotional sort of jagged moments as well, and has her own reactions to this experience of having, you know, she had a very different time getting to America than László did, which wasn't great, but he got there sooner, and she needed this sort of external help to make it happen. And she's, you know, much quicker to be like, "Yo, this place sucks. I think we need to get out of here." And you know, the evidence is compounding. So yeah, I think that, you know, I think she's given enough. It's weird to me, not to get ahead, but yeah, it's weird to me how little attention she has gotten in the conversation, she being Felicity Jones, the performer, to you know, for how important I think she is to make that second part of the movie work.
And the other thing I would add, and this kind of goes in my next question, is, you know, her voice, she doesn't appear in the first half of the movie, but we hear her voice the whole time, right? The narration is large, like, cuts in and out of her, the voiceover of her, the letters she's writing to László. And so that plus, I'm going to collapse a couple questions I had together. So that plus Zsófia being the bookend, because the scene of her being interrogated after they've fled, right? And László doesn't think he's going to see them ever again. That's the image we begin and end the movie with, is her. And so, like, what do you make of that? Like, what does that contribute to the story? What is this supposed to mean? Why is it set up that way?
I mean, practically, she's who's sort of left to tell the story. He seems to be in a sort of state of decrepitude. But I think, you know, you're asking the sort of like bigger questions, like what it means, and I think that this is related possibly also to um to the speech she sort of gives, the epilogue that she gives. So Zsófia, I'll start with her. She's the closest sort of family that's remaining, right? To talk of him. So she's naturally the person that one would come to sort of celebrate him. Um, and what's startling about this moment, but kind of great, in the move in the epilogue, is that, you know, we followed everything Laszlo's perspective for so long, um, and we sort of know that her knowledge of him is limited, right? And what the epilogue serves to do, this great speech that she gives, is really long for like a speech in a movie, right? Like, again, like, to give the comparisons to theater, and a monologue like that makes sense on a stage, but we're very unaccustomed to sitting in a movie theater and hearing someone just give an extended speech. Um, but what I loved about it, to go to Greg's point about sort of like the literary comparisons, is that, um, I mean, I love it when an artist, like, the movie was already so successful up to this point, that to just sort of like put a, you know, I'm just accustomed to just sort of like, you just finish it. You just like put that last sort of flourish, just finish that last beat. But to actually like insert like a new idea, and to have to execute like a new like premise at that stage of the movie is just incredible. I mean, like, it's you know, we followed, again, Toth through this very singular journey, and the epilogue serves to move us totally away from his perspective to the way that history has synthesized and defined him. Um, and we understand, because we've been with him through the entire movie, that this representation that's coming from Zofia is both bigger and smaller than the man himself. It augments him and flattens him at the same time. And and that's what we're sort of left with when we have like great people who like contribute great things, like we have their art, and we have the sort of like the version of the story that we're all fed, but the movie tells us more, obviously, right? And so that contrast is another layer of meaning to this movie that is full of meaning.
I love all that. I think to add to it, I think that final speech is the thing I'm most looking forward to seeing again. I just have to get through the first 3 hours and 22 minutes to get to that final sequence. But I think it's so delightfully jarring to suddenly be in the 80s and have that aesthetic and have all these sort of like videotape grain instead of the VistaVision. And yeah, all of that is super interesting. And I think there's the sort of key message that's sort of right there at the top, which Jen, I think, is the one who mentioned earlier, which is basically László wins and Harrison doesn't, because everyone remembers László and Harrison doesn't even get his full name mentioned at all. He's just there in passing. His family name is on this institute that we hear about, but that's just a building, like whatever. And it's a building that exists and people care about because of László. So there's that. But I think, yeah, there's also that, as you were saying, the sort of historification of things and how the narrative has already started to be changed by Zofia, who has been around, has been sort of part of the story. And I think, to go back to your original question, I think that's why we cut back to her at that, like from the opening thing of her sitting in that room of like, okay, like where are you going to go? Like, you've been liberated. Now what? Like, or, I actually am not certain if that's supposed to be a liberation question or if that's a sort of pre-capture question, like of the, where are you from? What is happening from
I think
when
she's still being interrogated in that scene.
Okay. That's, but it's that sort of, they're like, it's sort of a good cop. It's like, but it is I mean, it's in Hungarian, so who knows, but it sounded German to me at the time. So I was like, I don't trust this guy. But I think that there's a lot of layers there of, she's been in this movie the whole time, and because she doesn't speak, she is a witness and she's the one who's sort of seeing these things. But then now that she has her voice, she gets to change what happened and gets to sort of move things around. And suddenly, and this is my memory of speaking to Antonio about this movie, sacrificing content for friendship, was that, like, in the end, they're like, oh, the reason he was so that László was so particular about or they don't say this, what they say is the Van Buren Institute is designed to be like Buchenwald, and it's designed to be the physical space that reminds him of the separation between him and his wife, but like the ways in which maybe they could reconnect if he rebuilds it. And that's never discussed, that's never dealt with, but like, he is so particular about the dimensions and about how tall the ceiling should be and the materials they use and all that, and he gets so
and that's what he
frustrated
pays
by all
for,
that.
right? He's willing, that's the thing that he's willing to pay
He does,
for.
but we also don't know if that's true. Like, is that really what László was thinking, or is that the meaning that is being put onto it by later generations, by Zofia, by the art critics and the historians who see it? And I think that's great that we don't know that. And I think that the sort of big quote, which was mentioned earlier, that comes up there at the end, which is, no matter what the others try and sell you, it is the destination, not the journey. And the selling is like, well, of course that's bad, because that's the money, that's the capital, that's the sort of that type of power. But the real artistic thing is, it's the destination, not the journey. But then the whole thing has been a journey. And it's also like, we're looking at this woman who, yeah, she's arrived here, she's able to give this speech, but then we cut back to her at the beginning of the story, and the whole thing has been the journey from point A to point B. So I think it's very interestingly, and I think beautifully gnarled and complicated, that it feels a little bit like that sort of like the I don't know why this is what I think of, but sort of like the end of Psycho, when a psychiatrist comes in and is just sort of like, let me explain what's been going on with this guy. He's psycho. I don't know what to tell you. And that's like, that feels a little bit like, oh, okay, that's fine. It feels like this is the explanation, but there's so many things that not that they don't add up, but are intentionally laid out to be, I think, inquired and to be questioned and to be thought about a little bit more. So, I think that's why I think we have that framing of the two sort of modes of Sophia before and after.
So I think I'm gonna say exactly what those two just said, but in a stupider way, which is I will say I would have liked this film a lot less if the epilogue hadn't been there. I think it was necessary. And for me, this is the moment where we really go from like, this has been the unique journey of this individual to this is America, right? Like, this is everything around us. And I think the point Antonio was making was kind of tops on my mind, which is I really liked how you said it flattened him and gave him depth, right? Because I do think that's what history does to these figures. And we have been, in a brothel with him. We've been as he's sleeping in the back room of a furniture store. But when you go to the museumified, mystified version of what this history becomes, it's like, no, it's just the great master who created the great things. And then to buttress that, because this is an architecture film, with what PT said, which is that I felt indicted in those comments about Buchenwald, because that's what I have spent my life doing, where you've written so many term papers where you're like, well, this is what Melville really meant. And you're like, you don't know. You're just taking a wild stab at it. And I think the standard debates about a critic and a critical framework around any work of art, it is exactly right, which is it both is that because that was somewhere in his subconscious, and it's not that because he never said that, right? And that we have to hold both of those in tension with each other when we appreciate a great work like that. So I think, and this is kind of addressing your question, Jen, but I think the shift from one generation to the next and that structure of the epilogue makes this a historiographic argument, that it's this is an examination of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and the country and the institutions and the buildings, because it is architecture that we are in a part of. And so I think all of that kind of really, to me, is where the film hit me with its thesis.
Thesis, please.
Nicely
So, Jen,
done.
we just talked a whole bunch about kind of what we thought the epilogue was doing in service of a thesis, and I know we've all read student papers that saved their most brilliant ideas for the end. So, thesis, please, is the section in which we try to identify what the filmmaker was trying to say and what their kind of pure point was. So, Jen, we are often very pushy and don't let you in. So I want you to take first crack at this. And like a good student thesis, you need to synthesize everything that we've talked about the last 47 hours or the last 3 Brutalists worth of podcasts we've recorded.
Well, it's the destination, not the journey, right? So hopefully, as long as I come up with something in the end, it's okay. What is this movie saying? So first of all, I just want to note that what you were talking about, Greg, reminds me so much of the cut to the shoes at the end of Zone of Interest. I think that does the same thing, not to parallel. I'm not paralleling them necessarily just because they're both Holocaust stories, but like, I think the idea of jumping to the future and generational kind of like how history and the passing of time, changes the way that we view history and stuff like that. Anyway, so what is the thesis of this movie? What is this movie trying to say? I feel like in order to answer that, you have to consider, why is this both a movie about an immigrant experience and a movie about an architect and about art, the artist, the problems of being an artist, right? And I think it comes back down, for me at least, to assimilation and compromise. And I think that László Tóth And to go to make the brothel scene, which I also had the same reaction to. I'm not above Greg in that. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I think the thing I remember from that initial brothel scene, other than the like, oh, it's this kind of movie kind of moment, is how they're talking. She's trying to be like, don't you think I'm beautiful? And his response, because she pushed him for this answer, not that she should have been prepared for this answer, but he was like, it's actually the space between your eyebrows that's the problem. I don't know if any of you remember this.
He also, first he says something like, you're very well proportionate. It's a very like design based thing of like
yes.
almost all the pieces, except for, since you asked, here's the part I don't like.
So, I'm bringing that up, half of as a joke, but to me, that was the first signal of like, oh, wow, he's like a talented artist, right? Like, because he doesn't give a crap about hurting other people's feelings. He's committed to the purity of his art, right? Part of this may also be because I just came from seeing A Complete Unknown today, which we are going to review another day, hopefully, but like, it's similar vibes in terms of like, oh, I'm being a jerk to you. I don't know. I'm too into my art, right? Like, it's a very similar thing. But anyway, so throughout the movie, and sometimes it's validated and rewarded, and other times he's punished for it, but he's always, no, this is what it should be, right? Like he has such a strong sense of what his artistic vision is, and it's really hard for him to compromise. That's why the scenes where he's like chewing out the other architect that they've hired behind his back is so funny. He's like, everything ugly will be your fault, right? Like, it's so good. I love him. And so I think if you take that, so that's the architect part of the story, and then you take the immigrant part of the story, it's the same thing, because if you compare him to his cousin that we meet at the beginning of the movie, his cousin, the Miller and Sons guy, he is completely assimilated. He's like, his wife is Catholic, so he's like, we're Catholic. He's changed his name. He's tried to change his accent and his affectation so that László is like, you sound like the salesman from the TV, right? And László never does that. We're at the end of the movie and people are like, and Van Buren's like, you still sound like a shoe sale, like you shine shoes for a living, which is coding for like, you still have a very thick accent, right? Which is terrible. So to me, like, one largely works out, right? His uncompromising artistic vision does work out in the end because of the epilogue, as we just said. But the immigrant uncompromising is largely punished, right? And like, it is not successful, I think, because in the end, he doesn't know what to do, right? Arguably, his Ellis Island experience is what got him addicted to heroin, because that's what they gave him for his broken nose that he got on the journey, right? Like it's all wrapped up in all this stuff, and at the end of the day, he has no choice. In an act of desperation, he agrees to flee to Israel, right? Like, to be like, I will follow you or I will die, right? So the triumph and the utter defeat mixed together, all wrapped up in his one story, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's all really well said. The only thing I will add to it is there's also the sort of the inherent conflict of America was the place where he could go at this time and do that. Like, he built the things he had built in Hungary and it seemed like maybe around Eastern Europe, and they survived the war because people, or at least that's what he said, that they survived the war because people respected them as objects of art. But he was not able to do that there at that point, so he had to leave. He had to come to America and find a new way. So that gave him that opportunity, but they also never welcomed him. So it feels like there's the way to maybe bring those two ideas together is there's sort of who's in and who's out, like who's in the in group and who's in the out group. And it's like the people in the in group are just like, we love this thing that you do. We love that you can do this. And so we're going to let you kind of be like in on the edge. But as soon as we don't need you, or as soon as we're uncertain about what exactly it is that you're doing, like, we're going to keep reminding you you're on the cusp, and as soon as it's an issue, like, we're going to push you over the edge. You're never actually in. We're going to bring you close, but you're not in. And so I think there's something there about, I don't want to say it's exclusive. It's not exclusively an American mindset, but I do think there's that strong strain of sort of like, we're here, and does, you don't, it's not just people whose families came over on the Mayflower, and it's certainly not people who are from Native American tribes who have been here for millennia. It's, it's people who are just like, they're like, okay, I'm in, the ladder's pulled up behind me, and like, we'll mess around with some of these other people maybe, but they're not here for real. And before they get pushed out, the Toths choose to leave, and that's the end of the main part of the story, and then we only get the epilogue.
I have the quote. I don't know how helpful this is. I'm back into the cycles of peoplehood. But I found the quote on this random, possibly sketchy looking website. But I'm not going to say
back
the whole
in the
thing,
brothel scene. Come on, Jen, your history.
So I'm not going to say all of it, but the back half of what he says to Van Buren is, when the terrible recollections of what happened in Europe cease to humiliate us, I expect for them, being his projects and his buildings, I expect for them to serve instead as a political stimulus, sparking the upheavals that so frequently occur in the cycles of peoplehood. And I feel like that's what this movie is, right? It's sort of showing that process of like, and that's why the epilogue is so important, because it sort of shows that the how his work actually did all over the world ended up being a political stimulus, but the movie proper is showing us the utter humiliation that he went through.
I want to talk about Harrison Van Buren for a bit. Harrison was a self-made man, right? Like he worked he started poor and whatever, right? So in a way, we have two sort of like versions of like an American dream sort of story. Like they I think that there is a version of like Laszlo's story, for example, that does include actually the fact that he slept in the back room of his cousin's whatever. That starts the story, because it can get us to the point of like, and then the parts that get left out of the story are like the brothel and the hair, and maybe the heroin addiction is mentioned in sort of like a footnote, but it's not like a notable whatever. His dynamic with his wife, all this other stuff. That's the interesting texture of his biography that's sort of left out. But then we also have Harrison, right? Because we see Harrison at the end point of like his wealth, of all the accumulation of everything that he's gained. And you get the sense that like, I mean, that awful story that he tells about like his grandparents, right? It's uh to think that that's the culmination of like that's the lessons, those are the lessons that your struggle and your accumulation of wealth has left you with. That's the ethos that you're left with. That's the philosophy that you've come to after all of that. The movie does a really good job of portraying how this sort of uber wealthy, those like men who have the means of gods, can often revert to the foul temperaments of children, right? Like the first scene of him when he's screaming, this was like PT, I think it was right from PT's opening, right? He's just barking and angry, and it's familiar to me because I'm a parent, right? And like it's just pure childishness, right? It's just pure like anger, and like you eventually you understand that like that's your anger at him is tempered a bit by the circumstances. His mother is very sick and all this other stuff. But the way that he's treating them is a way that you'd be horrified, right? If like your children were treating someone in that way, right? To have the world cater to you, to get to the point where the world is catering to you, right? After working that hard, that it can actually diminish perhaps the spirit that enabled you to get that wealth in the first place, and skew your perspective in that way. So the rise of László comes with the fall of Harrison. And so the way that the moment in which they've met each other, when László is sort of like at the beginning of his story, but very much sort of needs Van Buren's like wealth to get to the point that he ultimately gets in the film, right? Like you get the sense that like his talent is his talent, but his talent could have gone unrecognized pretty easily. And the only reason that ultimately it becomes recognized, that he becomes who he becomes, isn't because even Harrison Van Buren recognized it, was because a magazine recognized it, because a tastemaker, someone that he like sort of nominally sort of like respected because he knows he's supposed to respect them, but not because he understands the art, right? Because he sees the place and he's furious, right? He only loves it when people who are supposed to know better love it, right? And that's a sort of fascinating thing. And this idea about patrons of the arts, we think of them as just like these sort of like, oh, these people with like wonderful taste, and who enable these whatever. But obviously, that's not the case here.
Nah,
Yeah,
eat the
also-
rich. They don't have any
Oh, yeah.
taste. So I just want to link what PT said, and then I'll give it to you, Jen. Sorry, with what Antonio said, with what PT said before, that's another version of inside outside, right? And my opening quote where he says, like, I found our conversation intellectually stimulating. He has no depth. Right, there's no kind of intellect there, and that's the one thing his money can't buy. Is it can't buy the taste, and it can't buy the intelligence, and so this uppity young immigrant woman can put him in his place, and and so he has to find ways to kind of strike back at this pair, because they are in terms of the talent and in terms of the taste and the intellect. So it's just kind of beautiful. And Jen's going to talk, but I'll pretend I'm giving the segue that it needs. It also makes it very prescient for the moment. I don't know. Antonio saying that we have a lot of really rich men who are reverting to childlike behavior. I don't know. Sounds like literally everything I see on the internet these days. But I do think that this conversation around Harrison Van Buren really points to how prescient this is, and that while this is set in an America of yesteryear, it is telling a very now story in ways that I think the Academy did figure out. And that was my big question. Would the Academy figure that out? And I think it did. But Jen, your point before you take the segue.
Yeah, I was just going to add that he has first editions of all his books. And László very quickly picks up on the fact that the curtains are drawn because he doesn't want the sunlight to get on the books, right? And then it becomes clearer later when he's going through the books and he's like, first edition, look, right? And he's excited about the book, but it becomes clear Van Buren only cares about, like, he's not actually reading those books. You know what I mean? Like, he's and like to the point where László's design closes the books away so they're out of sight, right? And erases the books from the library. Like, it's a library and you can't even see the books. Like, that says a lot about his character, and László is able to kind of like perceive that very quickly just by looking at the room before he starts working on it. But to your point about the man babies, I think that
Jen, do you have experience with man babies? Go on.
I don't know. No, not here. So I think back to the shoe shine scene. He flicks the penny at him in a very dismissive way, but then he asks for the penny back, right? And then there's so many. The screenplay is great. There's so many little moments like that where you're like, oh, I understand how you became where you are, right?
He thinks that's going to be this great joke that everybody laughs at, and everybody's like, whoa,
like, what?
dude. And when he leads them to the hilltop, right, he's like, everybody's going to love this, and everybody's going like,
we're
like,
cold.
no, like,
what?
This is dumb, and tries to. So I think you're absolutely right that those are all these signs that for all his power and the way he controls all these people around him, they don't willingly follow him, right? I mean, we know this as professors because we tell dumb jokes in class and everybody laughs, and then you try those dumb jokes outside of class when you don't have the power dynamics and nobody laughs. Nobody likes
That's a really
them.
good point.
They laughing in their class?
I hadn't even thought about that.
The
other thing too. Wait, one more Harrison diss, and then PBT, you can continue. But the pool when he's like, so you want gymnasium, you want library, and then he's like, how about swimming pool? And then I'm sorry, that's a really disrespectful accent to have. I just love it so much. And then what's Harrison's response? Oh, I don't swim.
Yeah.
You're not designing the building just for you, dude. Like, but that's how he's acting, right? Like that, like nothing outside of his own personal orbit matters. And that's true because he's the one with all the money, right? Anyway, PT, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's another, I mean, I don't want to say it's another movie, but there's another story that could be unfolding in a different setup, which is this sort of nouveau riche guy where Harrison's the main character. And he's just like, I'm really rich, I grew up poor, and now like I'm throwing my weight around, and how much all these people around him don't like him. And maybe this is because instead of going to see The Brutalist again, I went to see Citizen Kane again in the movie theater, which does have this as a degree of an element of like, oh, now this guy has all this money and he acts like he everyone's gonna love him for that, and question mark. But like he goes up on that hill and he's like, I'm gonna build this thing, isn't that great? And people are like, no. And then he has to have all these town halls because László designs this thing that everyone is like, this seems crazy, and like, what are you gonna do? And to me, that harkened back to, I know we all have Boston connections. I'm not going to ask it to see to prolong the point. But I grew up being like with the received wisdom from my family that the ugliest building in the world is City Hall in Boston, because that had been a neighborhood, Scully Square, that I guess was a little like dicey in terms of like, it had some American Tail, 50 Goes West places in it, if you know what I mean. And so they bulldozed it and they made a plaza and they built this Brutalist building in the middle of it. And everyone, my parents are just like, this is the ugliest thing in the world. Nobody likes it, blah, 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 blah. And so like I spent it was a long time before I realized anybody in the world liked this kind of architecture. So again, that's my experience. I don't know if that's actually part of the movie, but there is that sort of periphery of the people in the town having to be assuaged that like, no, the hill is going to have this crazy looking building up on it, but it'll be fine and you'll like it. And it's going to have a church and you'll be able to use it and it's going to be great. But it's really this rich guy's memorial for his mom that like, he is just imposing his will on the people around him, like the people of this town, this little Doylestown, like exurb, it looked like that he was living in. So in the same way that there's the artist dynamic of him being like, I don't know anything, I can't create, I don't know anything about it, and I don't have any taste, but I'm going to be the dictator of what can be done in an artistic way. I mean, he's even just doing that in terms of space of the people around him, which again, it's a shame the movie doesn't have any relevance about the super wealthy just taking control of all of our lives and telling us what we have to do and deal with. But the movie still has that, and it's nice.
Speaking of rich people that get to decide things, I think we should go to Oscars Watch. This is possibly the worst segue I've ever made. So I would say that The Brutalist is a pretty heavy contender at the Oscars race in general. I actually would say that it's like right behind Emilia Perez. Like, what is your assessment? Like, where are you ranking? No, I'm sorry.
No, we're just upset about it.
Yeah,
you're accurate. We're just not pleased with the accuracy.
I'm just reporting the facts.
I spent the last week just like preparing myself that Emilia Perez is just going to win, and it's like, okay, that's fine. There'll be a bunch of other movies I liked from the year that are around, and Antonio will be happy.
No, wait, hold on.
Yeah,
I liked Emilia Perez the most out of all of us, but I don't necessarily. I think Emilia Perez still is fairly polarizing. I think there are a lot of people who like it a lot, but I think that at least on the Best Picture voting, right? That's the one with the weighted ballot. I think that there are a lot of people who would rate it fairly low. Whereas The Brutalist, I think that the challenge is everyone seeing The Brutalist, but I think that when everyone sees The Brutalist, even if you're more lukewarm on it, I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine someone saying like that's the 10th out of all of these films if you've seen them all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Emilia Perez, you love it's 1 or 10 or like high or pretty low. So I think it's obviously like a strong contender. But I don't know, in a year in which Emilia Perez and The Brutalist are the two things that took the Golden Globe wins, I think that just points to like it's just a weird year and kind of an unpredictable year. And I think it's actually more if it were Emilia Perez and The Brutalist and then The Field, right? Like those are the three choices. I like The Field actually. Like I think that it's going to come from something outside of that, but it wouldn't be shocked if either of those two wins. But I actually think The Brutalist is more likely than Emilia Perez. But go on. What do you all think?
Well, so I will. I don't know if you all were planning to call out my bad Golden Globe predictions out. But I think the Golden Globes were the kind of pivotal moment in the story of The Brutalist. And I had said that afternoon that I thought after the Golden Globes, we weren't going to hear about The Brutalist anymore. And that was obviously the exact wrong take. But where that came from is that I felt like that was a big proving moment between, is this just a critical darling that the film bros love and that is there, or is it going to actually hold that wider appeal? And while I'm not the prognosticator in the group, it seems to me like the buzz that night changed from like, maybe it's a thing to this is a big thing. And this is, one of the front runners for that. And I think that's a credit to the speeches that were given. I think it's a credit to the awards that it won, that it came out looking dominant that night. And then to Jen's earlier point, where everything after that got muted by the very real, very terrible things going on in your city, that it feels like that's continues to be the dominant force. Now, sorry, Jen, I'll tell it to you like you're a normie. But the normies in my life have all said, sounds cool. I'm definitely not going to the movies for 4 hours. And that includes, people who love movies and see a lot of them, and people who maybe get out to 1 or 2 a year who are like, that's not going to be the one.
I mean, and that was sort of when we were talking about Marianne Jean-Baptiste, and it's like, oh, is it possible people aren't going to watch enough to get it? Is like, are they going to watch 20 minutes of this? Maybe get to that brothel scene and be like, okay, yeah, all right, fine.
Yeah.
And then be like, yeah, just the music was good. Like, Adrien Brody's doing a good accent. I'm done. I don't want to watch more of this. That seems like it is definitely possible, but. Yeah, I do think it is. It did have a pivot point. I think, Greg, what you were saying is interesting. That like with the new Golden Globes, like it is maybe just more another critic group, sort of rallying and supporting it. It just has a TV show that people are used to it being wackier, and we haven't fully adjusted in our minds to what the new Globes looks like. But yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly up there in picture. I think, Jen, you're right. It's 1 or 2. I mean, personally, I think it gets 10 nominations, or it's in the running for 10 nominations. I shouldn't say that because it might be 8 to 10.
Yeah, I have it down for 8. So I have, and this is only because I have a spreadsheet open. And
well, yeah, I trust you more than me.
I have original screenplay, supporting actor, supporting actor, score, production design, cinematography, and best picture. So noticeably not editing, because I think the consensus is no film more than 2.5 hours can be eligible for editing. How can that be how can that film be well edited?
Sorry, I like that joke.
Yeah,
it is funny.
Well, it's not like it is a great joke, but it's also not a joke to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like that's actually what they think. You know what I mean? So
and it isn't like Thelma Schoonmaker getting nominated for Killers of the Flower Moon, who's a legend in the field. It's whoever edited this movie. All due respect to them. So how am I miscounting? I had all of those, but I did include
you have it in?
Editing. I don't score, production design.
Did you say director?
Yeah, Jen, did you say
I don't think
director?
Jen said score.
I did say score.
Oh,
so I have
you say director?
screenplay, actor. Oh.
Did you take supporting actress out?
Oh, I did. I just didn't write. Literally, I did Control F, and The Brutalist and Brady Corbet are different words. So, yes, I have 9. Thank you.
So I had all of those. I did have editing, but this is done in a bubble of a vacuum of just thinking, what could the Brutalist be nominated for? I have not done the gamifying I should say gamifying, but I haven't done a full analysis of what are the other movies. It just feels like, yeah, editing, why not? But you're right. It could fall out of those. And, it maybe like it's possible supporting actress there. That's a category ripe for upheaval, as we were talking about. So maybe she ends up on the outside. It's possible Guy Pearce ends up on the outside. I don't think so. But like, I like everything is crazy. But yeah, I would lean towards more. I think.
You think Jeremy Strong boots him out? That's probably what would happen if he didn't get in.
I'm not saying I think that. I'm just saying that like there's a lot more peripheral than there is locked in. And I think picture, director, actor, screenplay, and score are probably the only ones locked in. Maybe cinematography too. And then everything else could go crazy. But I would think these 9 or 10 are pretty good. And I think it's probably winning at least 2 of those, maybe
I think
4.
director Corbet is the front runner for sure.
And score,
this,
I think
this
score is
AI
the
business might hurt that a little bit.
That's what we have to talk about.
Should we talk about that now since I brought it up? We made jokes 4 times about it, I think, without any context. So does anyone want to explain what this is a hot off the presses dish?
It is. This is from the last day or two. It's basically like a story came out with the headline of like the Brutalist used AI, and like, is this going to hurt the Oscar chances? And the story is there were 2 places in which AI was used. One was in I think it's just the reading of the letters, the voiceover of the letters between László and his wife. That because there's words that are really hard for non-Hungarian native speakers to pronounce correctly, they used the Respeecher, which is the company that has done like, it's made Mark Hamill sound like young Mark Hamill. It made whoever read Darth Vader's voice sound like James Earl Jones. It can merge. It can merge these things. It took a native Hungarian speaker, and Adrien Brody, and a native Hungarian speaker, and Felicity Jones, and merged them for those words and those phrases that just otherwise would be not said properly. That's what Brady Corbet is saying. And then the second thing is, and it's now unclear because basically someone is like, well, they used some image generating AI to generate models of buildings that are basically like make brutalist buildings that are not actual brutalist buildings. And like, what are some models for the other things that László did in the time between the movie proper and the epilogue for the background of the museum piece? And then that like they did that, but then they had an artist go and like tweak them and sort of actually make them, but that the artist used it as the foundation of some of the choices. Instead of just looking at brutalist buildings and then trying to make their own, they got a computer, they got some sort of an algorithm to try to make its own take, and then it's like the artist selected a few and used those. And it opens up a lot of questions about, is this acceptable? Is this inherently, any use of AI is a tip of the spear that's going to lead to more and more stuff being implemented in movies that's going to cause a bunch of job loss. People in the industry obviously don't like any use of AI. So even if it's defensible in a case-by-case basis for these 2 instances, there has been a lot of sort of negative reaction to it, at least in the places I've seen online. It also is campaigning against one of the front runners, that they're like, oh, hey, guess what? Like, that movie that you love that you're thinking of voting for, it has this, like, don't you want to be against it? And then the other voices coming out to be like, actually, maybe Adrien Brody's not that good an actor. Could be people who have a stake in pushing for one of the other actors to win Best Actor. So like, I've seen posts online where people are like, this negates his entire performance. Like, you have no idea how much of it was him, because they changed his thing, which I'm just saying crazy. That's out there. And so so that's part of the discussion. And Brady Corbet being the person responding to it also potentially, it upends to a degree the like, isn't this part of why this is a masterpiece? Is it was so cheap? Like, he scrounged this money together. He went and filmed, in Europe to replace the 50s Philadelphia, and he made this epic VistaVision 3.5-hour movie on a $10 million budget. And it's like, well, you got that budget because you used computers to do some of the work, which is, again, seems a little bit, I don't know if that's fair, but it's there. It exists as part of it. I will also note that when people were digging into the Respeecher company website, and they were just like, well, what are the things that they have done? They also did similar respeeching in Emilia Perez to change some of the singing voices where they couldn't, the actors couldn't hit the pitches, and so they had a singer come in and sing it, and they merged the voices together.
Wow.
We'll see if
Vagina
that becomes an issue.
pussy. Sorry.
You finally got it in. I mean, so yeah, I mean, obviously the use of AI, and especially in the entertainment industry, and the anxieties about like writers and actors being replaced, their likeness, et cetera, et cetera. Right. All of that is very complicated. What you're describing kind of just sounds like what another movie could have easily done with like visual effects. You know what I mean? Like, to me, tuning something with, even if with the AI or not, like tuning something digitally, the audio seems similar to how you would do that with CG for visual stuff. So I don't know. I think the reaction seems kind of harsh.
It does. I will note that one of the things people have sort of brought up, just I think trying to not be in the fray of like, it's good, it's bad, it's acceptable, anything is a problem, is they've been pointing to Tron from 1982, which was disqualified from visual effects because it used computer generated images. And at the time, the visual effects branch decided that was a bridge too far. And so they disqualified it from the category.
That's all that gets nominated now. You do
So,
practical
I mean,
stuff, you're not really in the running.
but, you know, like, what you know, again, if the argument could be, well, they're on the vanguard and they're using these things, but it also could be that like, oh, that just means all those, you know, writers and actors and voiceover people are the next puppeteers and the next maquette artists who have all been replaced by computer generated stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It could, I mean, it's not going to change the nominations because this came out after the nomination voting closed. It might affect people voting for stuff, especially if they choose to blame Brady Corbet for making these choices. Maybe he goes from being the front runner to falling out.
Greg saying, "How does it feel?"
Look, I'm no disrespect to PT, who's just a man reporting the facts. None of this feels important to me, right? Like, this is the, I mean, you said it exactly right. This is the kind of oppo stuff that comes out and everybody's like, what is this gonna, and it all just washes out. Like, people vote for the movies they like and they don't listen to this nonsense. So I'm going on record here now saying it's going to get exactly what it was always going to get. And this is not going to be a deciding factor.
An excellent stance easy. That cannot be proven.
Exactly right. I was going to say, you can't prove me wrong no matter what. So there we go.
Nice. All right. Any last?
Well, Jen, I'm sorry. Did you say all the awards you think it'll win? From your predictions?
No, I said all the things all the categories in which I think it will be nominated. Win, I think, is just, at this point, I'm most confident in director. Score, it has a good shot, depending on what the competition is. Especially now that I've seen the movie, the score is amazing. The score is so good. And the score arguably gives it that sort of like epic sweeping feel, right? If you take that away, the chugging along of a bus or a train or a car on the road like can only do so much unless you have that music going with it, right? I think
I need to apologize to Jen because I just was like, what won best score at the Golden Globes? Because I don't think it won. What was that? And I, of course, forgot it was your beloved Challengers. So my apologies for not remembering that and Googling it.
That's fine. It may not even get that may not even get nominated at the Oscars. We'll see. People are saying Wicked might get in, but the Challengers won't, which was just like, what are we doing?
Wicked, which is eligible, even though Dune Part 2 was not. Okay.
I know. Yes, I know. It's let's not start that. So I think that Adrien Brody is the next best thing, but I think it's going to be a race between him and Timothée Chalamet. I don't think anyone else is going to matter at this point. And then we're not even sure Felicity Jones and Guy Pearce are going to get in. Never mind. Yeah. So, but for them, possibly no, because like Kieran Culkin's definitely got this wrapped up. Yeah. So I think
Well, and
Yeah,
Jen, your joke you've used with us many times. Felicity Jones requires that the Academy of Voters get into the second half, and the best part of her performance, Antonio's beloved handjob scene aside, means that they have to get to like the end of the
Yes.
movie,
Yep.
right? Like, I do not have faith in Academy voters are getting that deep necessarily.
I'm kind of like, why don't we get that Oscar reel clip on the internet? Like, let's go. Like, that's how you do it. You show clips of the first 10 minutes that Greg loves. You show her crazy scene at the end. Don't show the hand job scene. You know what I mean? Like just be strategic about it. But you know, of course, YouTube clipping The Brutalist is against Brady Corbet's entire vision for this movie. But if you want to win, that's what you do, right? Like,
to honor the legacy of David Lynch, have people watch it on their phone.
Oh no! Oh, that just got me really sad. So I don't know if it's win competitive in any other categories, which then leads me to believe the Oscar puzzle for it winning Best Picture is not quite there. Like it could technically, if it just had director and actor, maybe score. That it's not impossible, but that's an uphill climb if that's all.
I feel like the tipping point is if it takes screenplay.
Yeah,
which I mean is not likely. It's not leading, but it's possible. And if it does, then it's like, well, wait a minute, we're moving in a direction,
right? And screenplay is often the bellwether in that sense on the evening, right, on Oscar Sunday, to be like, oh wait, this one screenplay, maybe this means it's winning Best Picture. So, and if I'm looking at the competition, Anora's the front runner still, though I don't know how right that is. And then like A Real Pain's in there, like, so that it's in the mix for sure, but not leading the pack.
I'll just put it out there that when we're talking about wins, I'm going to say this is not my personal pick for Best Picture, but I think this is the one of the leaders that I'm hoping for. This is the one that feels the most like a good, satisfying Best Picture winner to me in most regards. So I think where my heart is, not my head is at the moment, would be this one to take the big prize.
I do kind of feel like it would be the most exciting to see outside the Dolby Theater on the column, where it's like Everything Everywhere All at Once, Oppenheimer, The Brutalist. Like, that'd be kind of fun for the last few years. I think.
Would. Yeah.
Brutalist feels like a Best Picture-y kind of all of them. It feels the most like that sort of mold. Even as this entire exchange has been about how it sort of breaks a lot of molds, it feels the grandest, the biggest out of all of them. Wicked, it feels maybe a little too popcorny in part one, and then Amelia Perez too polarizing. I don't know. So I could definitely see this taking screenplay, actor. Again, I like Greg. This is not my heart, but I could definitely see it taking all of those and then taking Best Picture.
Yeah. There's always Conclave.
There is.
Is there any more? I don't know. I feel like Conclave is cooling fast, right?
Yeah.
It's the African bishop after the woman is revealed, and he gets those votes still for the next round, but it's like no, he's not I
mean, Conclave does really well on a preferential ballot.
Yeah, that's
because who's putting it lower than like 4 or 5? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, offended Catholics. I don't know how many there are.
Yeah, but I don't know how many of those are there.
It's a great question. This may be too much, and Jen, feel free to cut. But like, I do think, isn't there a path for like 7 or 8 movies to win Best Picture at this point, which is way more than normal?
It's wild. Yeah. I mean,
it's a spread the love year. It's gotta be like nothing's gonna run away with 12 wins. It's gonna be,
but because you don't know where the love might be spread, like the voters won't know that. So like, it's possible that one movie gets like 6 wins because everyone's like, oh, I'm giving the Brutalist actor, I'm giving the Brutalist screenplay, I'm giving the Brutalist, cinematography, and then suddenly it wins all of those because different people voted for it. So. Yeah, it's wild. Like, I mean, I could still see something even as like, I don't know if A Real Pain's going to get nominated for Best Picture. If it does, why couldn't it be Coda, where it wins original screenplay, supporting actor, picture? Like, which is just like, sure, it's a flight of fancy sort of, but also makes sense.
Yeah, there are a lot of different paths, and part of me, because I've been mulling over my nominations predictions a lot this week. How could you tell? But it seems to me that the below the line categories might actually matter more than they usually do because of that, right? Because it's like if you're counting the preferences of all the guilds, I feel like if there's someone sweeping below the line, then that could, there are a couple candidates for that too. Like that could be The Substance, that could be in terms of also nominated for Best Picture, that could be, it's probably not gonna be Dune, unfortunately, though it could be still. Wicked's has its strength in a couple below the line categories. A Complete Unknown probably does. It's probably getting in sound. People are talking about Complete Unknown getting in for editing. So yeah, it's a crazy time.
And all will be revealed Thursday. As soon as we have thoughts, we will make sure we get on these microphones. But we hope that listeners will be watching the nominations come out live, even if you're on the West Coast like these fools and have to get up at, 5 a.m.?
5:30.
It's 5:30.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll be fine. And we want to hear everybody's thoughts, and we want you to yell at us on social media, because that's PT who gets yelled at, not me.
Yeah.
And let us know what your thoughts are, and we will absolutely incorporate those when we react. But I think, what everybody must be hearing, if they're 2 hours and 14 minutes into this podcast, is that, we're really excited. It's the most exciting part of the year, where the nominations, and then, like I was alluding to with my question earlier, some things leave the conversation, and that's kind of a little bit of a sad moment. But I think we're all really excited to see what this race ends up being for the next couple months.
Yeah. Nominations might tell a really compelling story in that sense. We might know a lot more come Thursday. So yeah, excited. I'll be screaming into my pillow, because that's how historically I've watched it, is on my phone with earbuds, like in bed, and then like reacting like by screaming into my pillow so I don't wake anybody else up. But Antonio, where can folks, I don't have a good segue from screaming into your pillow. Where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Elefano, AELEFANO. Greg, where can folks find you?
People can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd at IonCanon, EYEONCANON. My current, or one of my current Letterboxd projects, being to watch as many films as possible by Jimmy Stewart, one of America's great actors, which will eventually lead me to his final film, which is, Jen?
Wait, what?
Fievel Goes West.
An American
There
Tale.
it is.
Wait,
We did
what?
it. We did it, everybody. Game over. PT, where can people find you?
Yeah, he's only in the unrated cut that has a bunch of brothel scenes in it.
Let's not do that. Poor mouse.
You can find. I'm picturing Jimmy Stewart in mouse-based
stop.
brothel scenes. You can find.
Oh my
me on
God! You got to see Dana Carvey.
Wait, sorry.
You got to hear Dana Carvey's Jimmy Stewart getting intimate in a car impression. Have you heard this?
Yes.
Why are we talking about
yes,
this?
it's so good. Sorry.
Which also relates to the Saturday Night Live extended ending of "It's a Wonderful Life." But anyway, that's a different.
Jimmy Stewart's name in Fievel Goes West is Wiley Burp.
Yeah,
because you needed to know that.
Incredible.
Continue.
What a capstone. An Omicron level capstone to a career.
I'll pause there. Wait, so I'll take it again. PT, where can people find you and the podcast?
Oh, you can find me on Letterboxd. The account name is at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can also find the podcast there at LTR Pod. You can also look for the podcast on Instagram, Threads, or Blue Sky, which I forgot to mention earlier. All of those are at The Long Take Review. You can email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com, or you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're listening right now. Just hit subscribe, follow along, leave a comment, send us a note, and it would be great to hear from you. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me reading the Wikipedia article for An American Tale, Fievel Goes West. But you can also find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Ba, 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 ba. Hopefully that's accurate. I don't know.
Well,
There are no
and-
cats in America, and the streets are paved in cheese. Do you not remember the song? Come on. What kind of immigrant story are we talking about tonight?